I know that everyone is making preparations for Christmas, and sometimes in all the excitement we forget sometimes a very important member of our family, and that can sometimes be our puppies. And so, they don't always know what's going on about Christmas, and so they have to be filled in, especially if they're new to Christmas, if they're a puppy. I know some of you have cats and other kinds of pets, but many of us have had a dog, and so maybe you'll understand when this is what an elder dog would tell a young puppy about this upcoming Christmas thing that it has never experienced before. So the elder to the young puppy, be especially patient with your humans during this time, as they may appear to be more stressed out than usual. Be tolerant if your humans put decorations on you. They seem to get some sick kind of pleasure out of seeing how you look with fake antlers and bright red bows on you. They may come home with large bags of things they call gifts. Do not assume that all the gifts are yours. They may bring a large tree into the house and set it up in a prominent place and cover it with lights and decorations. Bizarre as this may seem to you, it's an important ritual for your humans. So there are some things that you need to know about that tree. Don't you know what on the tree? Don't drink the water in the container that holds the tree. Mind your tail when you're near that tree. And if there are packages under the tree, even ones that smell interesting, and even those that have your name on them, don't rip them open. And don't chew on that cord that runs from the funny-looking hole in the wall to the tree. And finally, and mind you, this is very important, a big man with a white beard and a very loud laugh may emerge from your fireplace in the middle of the night. Don't bark at him, don't jump at him, and whatever you do, do not bite him. So there you go. If you have a puppy, now you know what to inform him or her. Christmas is a fun time, but really Christmas is really about, obviously, the birth of Jesus Christ. And there might be some good questions that we could ask ourselves as we head into Christmas. Like, what would Jesus really want out of that day or out of this whole season, perhaps? Would Jesus want us to celebrate his birth or his birthday? I think the answer to that would be yes. You can answer that for yourself. How would he want us to celebrate? Well, I think he would probably want it to be about more of the internal than the external. External is okay, but do not forget the internal aspects of what Christmas is really about. What would he want us to remember or to emphasize? Well, I think he'd want us to, most importantly, remember his teachings, what he was about and what he emphasized, and to live those teachings. He did say, "Follow me." And what would he want the significance of his birth to really be about? And I think that would be about having brought the light of God through love into the world. He said, "I am the light of the world, you are the light of the world, now go be a light, let your light shine too." And he would want us to find that same light in us and express it. And also, really, he would want us to engage with and live from our own true identity. Because really, he came into the world to model a dimension of oneness and connectedness to the source that he wanted all of us to have and experience. And so that would be very, very important. I think Jesus would want the story of his birth to become our story in some very meaningful, mystical way, that his birth represent sort of the light of God coming on even ever brighter within each of us individually. Now, most people are led to think that the Christmas story had its beginning with the story of Jesus' birth. It didn't, okay? The Christmas story did not begin with the birth. It actually began 600 years or so prior to the birth of Jesus. The Christmas story began. It began with really a prophecy of Isaiah. and where he said, "For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." It can be found in the 9th chapter of Isaiah. And it's interesting to take note, in addition to that, the different slants that each of the gospel writers took in relation to the birth story, the birth of Jesus Christ, because each of them had a kind of a unique approach into what they were emphasizing. And keep in mind that these were written in something like at least 30, 35 years was the earliest after the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, after his whole life was complete. And one of the Gospels, I think, was written somewhere around 100 years old. Scholars differ on some of the time zones, but the length of time. But nevertheless, the book of Matthew, scholars tell us, was written to the Jews, that the focus of the writer, Matthew, was to focus it towards the Jews. And you see that a bit. He was trying to convince them that Jesus, who they had rejected, had actually been the long-awaited Messiah. And you know this, really, because the writer in the area of the passages talking about the birth in Matthew, he traces the genealogy of Jesus back to Abraham. And so he wanted them to know that all Jews were related to the Messiah. And then you look at the Gospel of Mark, and that was written mostly for the Romans. And a Roman wouldn't have been at all interested in the birth of a Jewish baby. So you do not find the birth of Jesus recorded in the book of Mark. And then you look at the Gospel of Luke, and Luke was a Gentile. He was a Hellenistic Greek physician. He was a humanist. And he told the story in wonderful detail. And Luke took the genealogy of Jesus, again, in that area of the passages where he's talking about the birth, took the genealogy of Jesus all the way back to Adam and Eve, because Luke was a universalist. Luke was saying that basically this is not anything exclusive for one people or for one religion, but this is for all people. Goes back to Adam and Eve, everyone, genealogically. And even you have in the passage where it states, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people, not any exclusive group. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord." And then you come to the Gospel of John, which is really the last one to be written. And it is the most metaphysical, it is the most mystical of all of them, really, meaning it has another level of spiritual depth and symbolism contained, and it has a level of enlightenment within it, and it is the book that really refers to Jesus as the Christ. The Christ is actually born in John. And the way he refers to it is as the true light that enlightens every man was coming into the world. So he is referring to Jesus, the man who brought the light, the Christ, that enlightens every man coming into the world. Again, a universal message that same light is in all of us. And verse 12 states, "To all who received him, who believed in his name, in his nature, in the fact that he was the light, and a light that was modeled to you and me that we have within us, he gave power to become the sons of God." To all who accepted that the same light is in you, he gave them the power to be sons of God too, to take on the Son of God in them. All right? It's a terminology really for the Christ within, the Son of God within, the I am within, the divinity of God within, and other synonyms. And the Apostle Paul followed up on this, having had a mystical experience on the road to Damascus and having clarity about what this was about. And that's when he said, of course, the mystery which has been hidden for ages and generations, which is Christ in you, your hope of glory. So again, it's important that we understand what we're talking about when we're talking about Christmas and when we're talking about a birth. and that it's an internalized kind of experience, certainly honoring Jesus as an elder brother, a man who walked the earth, but also what was it that he really emphasized? What was it that he wanted us to get with his life? So most of the Christian world has accepted really the belief that Christ was born in the manger 2,000 plus years ago. But spiritual masters and spiritual teachers, mystics, would tell us that Christ was not born then. What we've just been talking about was Jesus was born then. Christ basically was born much earlier. And some scholars would say, well, the first reference to it biblically of the Christ really was in Genesis, where it said that so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. There's where the first reference to the Christ is. And again, in the New Testament, it was simply called the Christ. In the Old Testament, it was referred to as that which is of you that was made in the image and likeness of God. And so even Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. I am is synonymous with the Christ, the light of God in you. It's the universal Christ. And so there are some deep and wonderful metaphysical symbolism within the story of Jesus' birth. Every aspect of the story has a meaning, whether it was the manger or the inn or the wise men or Herod or the shepherds or the star or Mary and Joseph, what have you. They're all symbolic when you consider them metaphysically. They had a representation. So that, as an example, just to give you a few, the inn represents the intellect, okay? And there was no room at the inn. And understand that your mind is not able to grasp the Christ within. You don't get it in your head. You get it at a deep level. And your head will rationalize away many of the things I'm saying, that the light of God is in you the way that it is in Jesus. Certainly we're not expressing it, but it's there. It exists. It has to be brought out. It's what we're in this life to be about. But the inn, typically, there's no room at the inn. There's no room in your intellect many times. You can't take on something that big. And so we're closed off mentally to sometimes new ideas, new theology, new inspiration. The manger is certainly symbolic. The baby was born and laid in the manger. The manger is the heart. It's where the pure feelings of connection lie. You lie in your heart, connected. That's where the Christ is, in the manger. Herod represents the ego, and the ego is always threatened by anything that is new and of the nature of God. The ego, as the Course in Miracles speaks of it, argues for separation. It always brings on fear, and so it tries to kill out the babe, tries to kill out the higher nature of the Christ within you with fear instead of love. And so love casteth out all fear. The star represents the possibilities of our own Christhood. The star may seem far away and remote, but it's bright, it's a light, it calls to us. It's the Christ that calls to us. It's the Christ of Christmas that calls to us. And unless we're open to new dimensions of spiritual enlightenment, we will overlook the star. Not everyone saw the star that night. Certainly Herod did not see the star, but the wise men did. The wise men represented wisdom, being open and receptive to new dimensions of truth. And so holiness is a big part of the Christmas season. And holiness is an important word. There was a holiness around Jesus' birth. And we should want to get inside Christmas and get inside the holiness of Christmas, to internalize Christmas, if you will. The Course in Miracles, which many of you study, some of you do not, but it's a great course, really. And it states Christmas celebrates the birth of holiness into the world. And Christ invites each of us to join with him, the one who decided for holiness for you. In other words, he made that choice of the Father and I are one. of holiness. He made that choice for you, to model that for you, to bring that into the world, to be a light, and then to call you to it as well. Of course, also asks the question, that we are supposed to ask in any decision we make: would you be hostage to the ego or host for God? In all the decisions that you make, this decision that I have to make, am I going to be held hostage by fear and the ego, or am I going to be a host for God, which is strength and power and faith and trust? It's a good question to ask. Of course, also suggests that our task is always to restore an awareness of the magnitude of what it means to be a host for God, and to have that move us beyond the littleness of separation. And so a big part of Christmas, when we get into the magnitude of it, is to be in the heart, and it is to be in the energies of giving. It's not just focused on ourselves. It's really, Christmas brings on that Christ energy of wanting to give. It's pretty rampant. People want to give. Everyone is in a different place when it comes to giving, of course. And we're to move beyond the littleness into the magnitude around that. Some people have trouble around giving, and some are afraid. They have fear and not enough. They have conditionings having to do with attachment and giving with strings or giving with expectations of return and all these different things. We're all at different levels. All of us are good givers here, I know. But there's a member of our congregation. He is a Dutchman. He himself is full-blood Dutchman, okay? And he tells a story to me. This was some time ago. He told me, he said, there is so much in the way that I was trained and conditioned as a Dutchman. I don't know if there were other Dutchmen here, and you don't all necessarily have to be like this guy, but he was saying he really had a reluctance to want to give. And somehow he was conditioned in that way. He went on to tell a story. He said there was a story about an Englishman, an Irishman, and a Dutchman. And they were all having lunch together. Some of you know this story? Anyway, they all ordered soup. So they all had their soup delivered. They're sitting at the table. And it just so happened that there were 3 flies in the restaurant. And they all dive-bombed one into each bowl of soup there at the table. And so the Englishman, being very prim and proper, took his spoon, almost without anyone noticing, scooped it out, put it on the napkin, covered it up. The Irishman, being a little crude, I guess, he picked up the bowl and blew it out with a little bit of soup, and fly and all were gone. The Dutchman looked into his soup, and he sees the fly stirring around in there, and he reaches down in the soup and grabs the fly by the wings. He starts shaking it and saying, spit it out, all of it, you good-for-nothing fly. Those are the differences. And this man that was telling me this said, sometimes I know that guy. He says, sometimes I am that guy. Interesting. Let me tell you about another guy. And he was asked, truthfully, a true story, what was his most significant Christmas, his most memorable favorite memories about the spirit of Christmas. And he said, it was a time I got a lesson on giving. And he said he was at a thrift store and he was gathering some goods for costuming for his kids for a Christmas play. And standing in line, waiting to check out, there was a mother and daughter in front of him. And he could tell by the clothing and even the conversation that they were not of great financial means. And so the little girl had grabbed a doll from somewhere and was begging the mother, going through the line, to buy her the doll. But the mother was saying, no, all we have is money for this coat. We need to have a coat for you so that you're warm. And she's crying and saying, Mother, I promise I'll be warm with the doll. And the mother had to prevail. And so she had to put the doll down. And then the little girl left with tears. And so this man said he was standing there waiting in line, watching all this, listening to this, and had his goods. And when it came time, he told the clerk, I'll be back. And he just put the stuff down. And he went out the door, and he got in his car, and he followed them without them knowing, far enough distance behind, saw where they lived, drove back to the store, bought the doll, bought a scarf that matched the coat that he saw the mother buying, went to the grocery store and bought several bags of groceries, got a card that said, "From someone who noticed and someone who cares." Drove back to the house, left it all on by the front door, rang the doorbell, and ran. And he said, "You know, that gift gave and gave and gave to me, to me." Every time he thinks of Christmas, that's a highlight because it continues to keep giving. He became host to the heart of the Christ in him. Okay? He wasn't held hostage to anything. He went with that something that moved within him. It was an act of giving that is the impulse of the heart, following the heart, not the head. There's not room in the inn. You see, it would rationalize it away many times. I've followed a little bit of the readings of Paramahansa Yogananda of the Self-Realization Fellowship, and he has 2 big volumes on the whole life and teachings of Jesus because he's so respected and valued, this great teacher that walked the earth. And it's very deep and enlightening. And so he says that there are spiritual vibrations that are heightened at this time of year when we are celebrating Jesus' birth. And just an excerpt from his writings, he states, each year at Christmas time, quote, "Each year at Christmas time, there are stronger than usual vibrations of Christ's love and joy that emanate the earth from the heavenly realms. The ether becomes filled with the infinite light that shone on earth when Jesus was born. Those persons who are in tune through devotion and deep meditation feel in a wondrously tangible way the transforming vibrations of the omnipresent consciousness that was in Christ Jesus." And he goes on to say the ideal then is to honor Christ in spirit, in meditation, from morning till evening, absorbed in feeling in one's own consciousness the infinite Christ that was born in Jesus. Pretty powerful stuff. So there are Christ vibrations that go on at Christmas time because we're so focused to acknowledging that vibration of that being. Those vibrations never go away. It's like a stream you step into. Okay, it has a deep influence if you're willing to internalize Christmas. And so the great value of Christmas is uncovering your own Christ self and evolving beyond separation toward oneness. Separation is said to be like being an orphan to God. And oneness is like being in partnership with God. And with that in mind, there's a story that I'd like to share with you. True story again, happened in 1994. There was groups of teachers that would go to a particular orphanage in Russia. And there were these 3 teachers that had the segment of time, a 3-month segment that went from November to February. That's 4 months, sorry. Anyway, it was over Christmas that they were there. And so it was nearing the holiday. It was 1994. It was Christmas. And these children had never had the Christmas story told to them. This is in Russia. And so they told them about Mary and Joseph and the stable and the manger and the inn and all of these things. And throughout the story, not only the children in this orphanage, but the staff were captivated, just glued to listening on the edge of their seats and listening to every word. And upon completing the story, then they had a little exercise for the children. They gave them different things to make a manger and like a sort of a nativity. And so they had little crude pieces of cardboard that they put together to make a manger. And then they had because they were so limited in what they didn't have even yellow paper there. They found some yellow napkins and they tore them up for straw to put in the manger. And then they had some flannel from one of the teachers' pajamas that they tore up to create into pieces for blankets for the children for it. And then they used a cutout doll baby that was made out of tan felt. And anyway, so all the children were working on this. They gave them all the materials and they began to walk around and look and see how they were doing. And they came to one little boy who was 6 years old, and his name was Misha. And Misha had finished the project already. And so the teacher looked inside the manger, and there wasn't one, there were 2 babies. Somehow he had put 2 babies inside the manger. And so she called for the translator. Of course, that was the way that the whole story, Christmas story, was told through a translator. And called for the translator to come over and have the little boy explain why there were 2 babies. And so he just kind of crossed his arms and started telling a story, 6 years old, and really had it accurate. He had remembered everything so beautifully, right on through to where Mary put the baby Jesus in the manger. And at that point, he began to ad lib. And it was there that he put his own ending. And he said, and when Maria laid the baby in the manger, Jesus looked at me and asked if I had a place to stay. And I told him, I have no mama, and I have no papa, and I don't have any place to stay. And then Jesus told me I could stay with him. But I told him I couldn't because I didn't have any gift to give him. But I did want to stay with him. So I thought about what it was that I had, what I had that maybe I could use as a gift. And then I thought, maybe if I keep him warm, that would be a good gift. So I asked Jesus, if I keep you warm, will that be a good gift? And Jesus told me, if you keep me warm, that would be the best gift anybody ever gave me. And so I got in the manger with Jesus. And Jesus looked at me and told me I could stay with him for always. This little boy had no mama, no papa, no home. This little boy gained everything for always because he opened his heart. He played host to God. He gave all he had, which was himself. That's what lying in the manger is about. I invite you to lie in the manger with Jesus this Christmas and have it be the best Christmas ever. God bless you all.